In this episode, I'm going to cover vertical layouts in GXT. I'll start off by configuring the vertical layout container, and then I'll cover the sizing of the width and height with sizing with doubles as percentages and sizing with an integer as specific sizes. And then when -1 is given for width and height, what will happen to the sizing? So I'm going to get started. I'm going to go directly to the vertical layout container guide in the GXT docs. And if you look down, let's just scan this because I want to cover what vertical layout data, and that's a layout data we say the child is going to size to. So I'm going to give the layout data of -1 and -1. That means I'm going to let the child be responsible for the width and the height. So here we have the width as -1 and the height of -1. That means I delegate the sizing to the child, and the child is responsible for that. So that breaks the sizing. I'm not going to pass that down in the ancestry. Okay, so then if we have -1 for the width, that's going to be natural sizing for the width, and the height is going to be 100%. Well, let's say I use a double. Well, that means I'm going to use a percentage. So we're going to do a calculation that says, okay, the width, if it's going to be 0.5, that's a double. That's going to be 50% wide or high. So that's going to take up 50% of the available space that the parent has. And if it's 75%, 0.75, that's going to take up 75% of the space that the parent has. And that'll be width is 50% and the height is going to be 75%. Okay, so then let's say we give it an integer value. That means it's going to be 100 pixels wide and 200 pixels high. So if it's an integer, it's converted to pixels. Okay, so there's some other containers in here that I won't cover in this episode that I'll cover in the future episodes. And I have a little better example here, and I'm going to go ahead and go into the IDE and cover doing an example. Okay, so the very first thing I need to do, and I'm not covering an embedded application in this episode. I'll cover that in a future episode, but I'm going to cover starting from the viewport. Well, if you're doing an embedded application, follow that episode. You'll start with that type of construction for the very root widget, which is then inserted to a div in an application. Okay, so root panel, I'm going to get the body of the document and add my viewport. My viewport I covered in the previous episode. It's going to be the root widget that passes on window sizing, the size of the window to the child widget. And auto import here brings up, and I'm going to complete and add in it and then import the library. So it looks like I didn't type that right. Complete that. Oh, I forgot the new, so I'll add new. Okay, so then I'm going to add, to the viewport. I'm working this backwards here in this. I might work it forward normally in my application development, but I just want to work the tree from the root and on to the children in this case. So this, I'm going to add a VLC, and my VLC is going to be a vertical layout container. So vertical layout container, VLC equals new vertical layout container. And then I'm going to import that, auto import with the key commands, Shift Command O for my IDE and OS configuration. And what I want to do is look at, so VLC, I want to add a top, a header, a center content area, the middle area, and the bottom. So let's work this backwards. So VLC.add. And I'm going to have a top. Then I'm going to go new vertical, because I'm going to pass on layout data of how I want it to size. And then I'm going to say 100% wide and 50 pixels high. And then I'm going to give it a margin. Well, let's come back to the margins. Why not now? New margin data. And no, that's margins here. And that'll be 10. Auto import. And I haven't created the top yet. So if I go in, I'm going to command click on vertical layout data. Here we have width, height, and then margins. That's how I figured it out. So I have to continuously look at this myself to remember width comes first and then height. Okay, so then I have the top. So then I'm going to copy this and twice, and then I want to do a middle and a bottom. And I want to do, instead of for the middle, I want to take it 100% of the available area for both width and height. And the bottom, I want to do for, let's say, I want to say instead of 50 pixels high, I'm going to do 100. Okay, so now let's make those top, middle, and bottom. Simple containers is what I'm going to use here. And they're just something simple, and I'll show as the series progresses, I'll continue in the episodes to build upon what we learned in these previous episodes. So we'll go new, simple, container, and then auto import. Okay, so I have top, middle, and bottom. Let's go middle, rename the variable name there, and bottom. Okay, so let's say, well, I'm not going to be able to see anything because they're just basically white containers. So what am I going to do? I could turn the borders on, but instead I want to give them colored borders for this episode. So I'm going to give it a custom style of inline style. So I'm going to get element, get styled inline style attribute, and then I'm going to get set property, and I'm going to say border, and that's going to be 1px solid, let's say brown. Okay, I'm going to copy this to the middle and bottom, and so I'm going to rename this middle. This works great for debugging, by the way. So if you have layouts that are malfunctioning and you want to see the top, you want to see if it's taking up the available size or pixel size that you set, give it a border. Now, keep in mind, when you set a border and give it a size, it's not going to be accounted for in some cases in layout configurations. So if you see it clipping a little bit, maybe 1 or 2 pixels by the end of the bottom of the container or a child container, you might consider that might be the border case. And go ahead and report that, because I'd like to consider that in the calculations in the future. Okay, so bottom there. Okay, so we have brown. Let's name this, give that purple, and let's say blue for this one. Okay, so we have top, middle, bottom. So let's see what this looks like in the application. So I don't have anything running. I like to check sometimes because the previous episodes I am recording and forget to terminate the process. So I'm starting up Super Dev mode with an embedded Jetty server, and it's copying the resources to the web app folder, and then I'm going to click on the application URL for local debugging. Oh, I have something there still, so let's go remove that from this is good to keep in mind, because if you have something here, we just remove it from the HTML. I'm going to go ahead and stop the debugging process and restart it. It's always good to keep in mind of the shortcuts for debugging and getting there quickly. So starting the Super Dev mode over from the debug icon, and then we'll go down to the bottom and wait for the URL and load her up. Okay, so I can probably minimize that again. Okay, so something there, just reload the page, so it got rid of that cached page. Okay, so the top, here we have the 50 pixels and a margin for 10 at the top and bottom. I think that's what I gave it. So we'll go back to, we'll close these here because we no longer need them. And we'll go back and we can see we have 50 pixels, and 100 pixels, and 100% and 100%. Okay, so what happens if I resize that? Wow, okay, so that's great, because the viewport is now providing the size events and given the sizing to the child vertical layout container, and it's sizing accordingly. So the calculation of 100% by 100% is working correctly. So that's pretty cool. Now this works great in all browsers from IE8 all the way up to Edge and modern Chrome and Safari, and I guess Edge is modern as well. And all these browsers that are green, it works perfect, all the way back to the old browsers as well. So that works great. So in the future episodes, I'll talk about some of the flow layouts, like using flex layouts and how to do this in the same effect. And that means the browser is doing the sizing, because the CSS is giving the declaration for the sizing for that in that case. So that concludes this episode today on vertical layout in the viewport. A simple configuration. Thanks for watching today. Follow me for more tips and tricks on GXT, and I'll catch you later.